I returned from Luxembourg 2 days earlier than planned. No calls, no warning. As I stepped into my mansion in Belgium, the maid grabbed my wrist and whispered, "Sir, if you want to stay alive, be quiet." Elias Koenig had learned silence long before he learned wealth. Growing up in the narrow streets of a German industrial town, he watched his mother stretch every mark, every coin, every crust of bread. She worked 3 jobs and never complained. She taught him that noise was for the insecure, that real power lived in observation, in patience, in knowing when to speak and when to hold your tongue. By the time Elias turned 30, he'd built an empire that stretched from Denmark to Sweden, from Austria to the Netherlands. Manufacturing, real estate, technology investments. His name appeared in boardrooms across Europe. But money never made him loud. He remained what his mother had raised, a man who listened more than he spoke. The mansion in Belgium was supposed to be his sanctuary. 18 rooms, marble floors imported from Italy, gardens that rolled toward a private lake. He'd chosen Belgium because it sat quietly between the countries he loved, close to his roots in Germany, near enough to his offices in the Netherlands, a short flight from anywhere that mattered. It was elegant without being flashy, refined without demanding attention. Just like him. He met Celine van Dyck at a charity gala in Amsterdam. She was Dutch royalty in every way that mattered. Old family name, impeccable manners, a smile that made photographers pause. She moved through the room like water, effortless and captivating. When she laughed at his jokes, Elias felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. The possibility that wealth didn't have to mean loneliness. Their courtship was swift. She said she admired his humility, that she was tired of men who measured worth in volume. Their wedding in Rotterdam was covered by every society magazine from Brussels to Copenhagen. Elias believed he'd finally found peace. He was wrong. The cracks appeared slowly. Celine's late-night conference calls that she took behind locked doors. Business meetings in Ireland that seemed to multiply. Weekends in Belgium where she claimed to be visiting friends, but the friends were never named. Elias told himself he was being paranoid, that success had made him suspicious of everyone. He traveled more, buried himself in work, convinced himself that trust was the foundation of marriage. He wanted to believe her. Naya arrived from Finland 6 months into the marriage. The previous maid had quit suddenly, and the agency sent a replacement, a quiet woman in her late 20s with careful eyes and an accent that softened every word. She cleaned efficiently, spoke rarely, and seemed to disappear into the background of the mansion's daily rhythm. Elias barely noticed her at first. She was just another presence in a house that felt increasingly empty despite its size. But Naya noticed everything. She saw the envelopes addressed to Dublin that Celine burned in the fireplace. She heard the whispered phone conversations in Dutch and English, the tone shifting from sweet to calculating the moment Elias left the room. She watched a man named Victor Hale visit twice while Elias was in Stockholm, staying for hours in the private wing, leaving through the garden entrance. Naya said nothing. She folded linens. She polished silver. She kept her eyes down and her thoughts to herself. When Elias texted Celine from Luxembourg saying his meetings had been postponed and he'd be home in 3 days, Naya saw the panic flash across Celine's face. She watched her mistress make a frantic call, pacing the library, her voice low and urgent. Naya understood then that something terrible was coming. Not heartbreak, something worse. The afternoon Elias returned early, the house felt different. Too quiet, too still. He'd taken an earlier flight, wanting to surprise Celine with flowers and a weekend away, maybe Paris, maybe Vienna, somewhere they could reconnect. He pushed open the front door with his key, expecting the usual calm of home. Instead, Naya materialized from the hallway like a ghost. Her fingers closed around his wrist with surprising strength. Her eyes, usually so passive, burned with urgency. "Sir," she whispered, barely audible. "If you want to stay alive, be quiet." Elias froze. His first instinct was confusion, then concern. Was there an intruder? A threat? But Naya's expression told him this wasn't about physical danger. Not in the way he understood it. She pulled him gently toward the kitchen, away from the main staircase, away from the sounds drifting down from the second floor. Voices. Laughter. Celine's voice, light and careless in a way he hadn't heard in months. And another voice. Male. Familiar somehow, though Elias couldn't place it. What's happening? Elias asked, his voice barely a breath. Naya looked at him with something like pity. The truth, sir. But if you go up there now, angry, loud, emotional, they will destroy you. They have a plan. You need to be smarter than your heartbreak. Before we go further into this story, I want you to do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Your support means everything. Now, let's continue. Elias felt his chest tighten. Every instinct screamed at him to storm upstairs, to confront whatever was happening, to demand answers. But his mother's voice echoed in his memory. Be quiet, Elias. Watch. Listen. The loudest person in the room is rarely the smartest. He forced himself to breathe, to think, to trust this woman who had no reason to protect him except, perhaps, decency. Show me, he whispered. Naya led him through the service hallway, up the back staircase used only by staff, to a small door that opened into a linen closet adjacent to the master bedroom. Through the crack, Elias could see his wife. And beside her, lounging on the bed Elias had bought for their first anniversary, was Victor Hale, the Irish businessman. The man Celine had introduced as a family friend months ago. They weren't touching. They were planning. And what Elias heard in the next 10 minutes shattered the life he thought he'd built. Victor lounged against the headboard like he owned the room, swirling whiskey in a crystal glass that Elias had brought back from Vienna. Celine sat at the vanity, reapplying lipstick with the casual precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. They spoke in English, their voices relaxed, almost bored. This wasn't passion. It was business. 3 more months, Victor said, examining his drink against the light. Maybe 4 if he's stubborn. But the prenuptial agreement has that clause about emotional abuse and coercion. We trigger it. You file in the Netherlands where the laws favor you, and we walk away with 40% minimum. Possibly 60 if the media circus goes our way. Celine laughed, a sound Elias had once found charming. Now it felt like broken glass. He'll never see it coming. Elias thinks humility is a virtue. He thinks silence makes him noble. It just makes him easy. She turned in her chair, meeting Victor's eyes in the mirror. His mistake was marrying someone smarter than him. Your performance has been flawless, Victor said, raising his glass in mock salute. The devoted wife. The patient partner. You should have been an actress. I am an actress, Celine replied. And he's been the perfect audience. Trusting. Grateful. So desperate to believe someone could love him for more than his money. She stood, smoothing her dress. When I accuse him of psychological abuse, of controlling behavior, of making me feel trapped in this ridiculous mansion, every photograph, every public appearance where I looked slightly uncomfortable will suddenly make sense. The narrative writes itself. In the linen closet, Elias felt Naya's hand on his shoulder, steadying him. His legs had gone weak. His hands trembled. This was worse than infidelity. This was calculated destruction. Celine had never loved him. Not for a moment. Not even in the beginning. Their entire marriage had been a performance, a long con designed to position her for maximum financial gain. Every smile had been rehearsed. Every touch had been a transaction. Victor leaned forward, his expression shifting to something more serious. What about the maid? The Finnish one. She's always around. Too quiet. I don't trust quiet people. Celine waved a dismissive hand. Naya? She barely speaks. She's been here 6 months, and I don't think I've heard her say more than 20 words. She cleans. She nods. She disappears. She's nobody. Keep it that way, Victor said. The last thing we need is a witness who actually pays attention. When you make the accusation, it needs to be your word against his. Emotional abuse leaves no bruises, no evidence. Just your testimony and his reputation. By the time his lawyers figure out how to respond, we'll have already shaped the story. Every news outlet from Dublin to Berlin will be running headlines about the cold billionaire who trapped his beautiful wife in a loveless prison. Celine moved to the bed, sitting beside Victor with the ease of long familiarity. And if he fights back? If he tries to drag my name through the mud? Then we escalate, Victor said simply. We hint at financial irregularities in his Austrian holdings. We suggest he's hiding assets. We make him look guilty of everything. Even if none of it's true, the investigations alone will tank his stock value and freeze his accounts for months. He'll be so busy defending himself, he won't have time to attack us. And while he's drowning in legal fees and reputation management, we'll be in the Cayman Islands, drinking cocktails and planning our next move. He'll be destroyed, Celine said softly, but there was no regret in her voice. Only satisfaction. Completely, Victor agreed. And he'll have no one to blame but himself. He chose to trust you. He chose to marry quickly. He chose to believe love was real. Victor finished his whiskey and set the glass on the nightstand. Rich men are all the same. They think money makes them powerful, but it just makes them targets. Your mother understood that. She taught you well. Celine's smile was cold. My mother married 3 wealthy men and divorced all of them comfortably. She always said the secret wasn't finding love, it was finding leverage. Elias gave me both a name and a fortune. I'll keep the fortune. They continued talking, laying out timelines and strategies with the precision of generals planning a siege. They discussed which journalists to leak information to, which lawyers in the Netherlands were most sympathetic to women claiming emotional abuse, how to time the accusation for maximum media impact. They talked about Elias like he was a problem to be solved, an obstacle to be removed, not a human being who'd given Celine everything she'd asked for. Elias listened to it all. Every word, every laugh, every casual dismissal of his humanity. Naya had pressed her phone into his hand at some point, and he realized she was recording everything. The audio was clear, damning, undeniable. But even with evidence, Elias felt paralyzed. This wasn't just betrayal. This was annihilation. They weren't content to leave him. They wanted to ruin him. To strip him of wealth, reputation, dignity. To make him a cautionary tale. His mother's voice whispered again in his memory, but this time the words were different. Elias, when someone shows you who they really are, believe them. And then decide who you're going to be in response. After 40 minutes, Victor left through the garden entrance, the same way he always did. Celine remained in the bedroom, humming to herself as she changed clothes, preparing for dinner as though she hadn't just spent the afternoon plotting her husband's destruction. Naya waited until Celine descended to the kitchen before guiding Elias back down the service stairs. They emerged in his private study, a room Celine rarely entered because she found his books boring. Elias sank into his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. He felt ancient, hollowed out. Naya stood by the door, her expression unreadable but her posture alert, protective. She'd saved him from walking into a trap. If he'd gone upstairs angry, emotional, demanding answers, Celine would have triggered her plan early. She would have screamed, called the guards, claimed he'd attacked her. The bruises could be faked. The fear could be performed. And Elias, caught off guard and furious, would have had no defense. "Why did you help me?" he asked quietly, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. Naya hesitated, then stepped closer. "Because I know what people like her do, sir. I've seen it before. And because you didn't deserve to walk into that blind." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "But helping you see the truth is only the first step. What you do with it, that's up to you." Elias looked at the phone in his hand, at the recording that held 40 minutes of damning confession. He could confront Celine now. He could play the recording, watch her face crumble, demand she leave. But Victor's words echoed in his mind. Even if none of it's true, the investigations alone will destroy him. They had a plan, a strategy. They'd thought of everything. If Elias moved too quickly, too emotionally, he'd lose. Not because he was wrong, but because he was unprepared. His mother had taught him patience. Now he needed to learn strategy. "Naya," he said slowly, looking up at her. "I need your help. Not just as a witness. As someone who understands what we're up against." For the first time since he'd known her, Naya smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who'd been waiting for exactly this moment. "I was hoping you'd say that, sir. Because there's something you need to know about me. And about why I'm really here." 2 weeks passed like a held breath. Elias continued his routine as though nothing had changed. He kissed Celine goodbye each morning, complimented her dresses, asked about her day over dinners that tasted like ash in his mouth. He traveled to Stockholm for meetings, returned to Denmark for a factory inspection, flew to Austria to review quarterly reports. To anyone watching, he was the same Elias Koenig, calm, focused, devoted to his wife. But beneath the surface, everything had shifted. Naya had told him the truth the night of the recording. Her real name was Naya Vertanen, and 3 years ago, her younger sister Lisa had disappeared while working as a personal assistant to a European socialite connected to a network of financial fraud schemes. The woman had used shell companies in Belgium, Austria, and Denmark to funnel money from wealthy men, always targeting those who valued privacy over publicity. Lisa had stumbled onto evidence and vanished before she could report it. The police investigation went nowhere. The woman had connections, lawyers, and a spotless public reputation. When Naya saw Celine's name surface in her private investigation, linked to the same shell companies, the same patterns, the same Irish intermediary named Victor Hale, she knew this wasn't coincidence. Celine wasn't just a gold digger. She was part of something larger, more organized. Naya had taken the housekeeping job to get close, to watch, to gather evidence that might lead her to what happened to Lisa. Saving Elias had become part of that mission, but it wasn't the whole story. I've already sent preliminary evidence to authorities in Finland and Sweden, Naya had told him that first night, her voice steady despite the weight of her confession. But I need more. I need transaction records, communication logs, proof that connects all the pieces. If you want justice, sir, we have to be smarter than they are. We have to let them think they're winning until the moment they've already lost. So Elias had waited. He'd played the oblivious husband while Naya quietly copied files from Celine's laptop, photographed documents left carelessly in the study, tracked Victor's visits, and recorded phone conversations through devices planted in rooms Celine thought were private. They built a case not just of infidelity or fraud against one man, but of a pattern stretching across Europe. Other men, other marriages, other carefully orchestrated destructions. But Celine and Victor had their own timeline, and on a cold Tuesday morning in late autumn, they decided to execute their plan. Elias was in his study reviewing contracts when he heard Celine scream. It was theatrical, piercing, designed to carry through the entire mansion. He stood slowly, his heart pounding not with surprise, but with grim recognition. This was it, the performance they'd rehearsed. He walked into the main hall to find Celine at the top of the staircase, her face twisted in anguish, her hands shaking as she gripped the railing. "Stay away from me," she shouted, her voice breaking. "I can't do this anymore. I can't live like this." The security guards appeared from their posts, confusion evident on their faces. Celine descended the stairs carefully, each step calculated to look like fear. When she reached the bottom, she turned to the guards, tears streaming down her carefully made-up face. "Call the police. Please. I need protection. I need help." Elias stood perfectly still, his expression neutral. He didn't ask questions. He didn't defend himself. He simply waited, watching his wife perform the role she'd been practicing for months. Victor appeared from the drawing room as though he'd been coincidentally visiting, his face arranged in concern and righteous anger. "Celine, it's okay," Victor said, moving to her side. "You're safe now. Tell them what's been happening. Tell them the truth." And she did. Celine told the guards, and then the police who arrived 20 minutes later, that Elias had been emotionally abusing her for months. That he controlled her movements, monitored her phone calls, isolated her from friends and family. That he used his wealth and power to make her feel worthless, trapped, terrified. She claimed he'd threatened her the night before, that she'd locked herself in the guest room out of fear, that she couldn't live in this prison anymore. Her performance was flawless, the trembling voice, the averted eyes, the way she flinched when anyone moved too quickly near her. The police took statements. The guards looked at Elias with uncertainty and something like disappointment. Victor played the concerned friend perfectly, offering to take Celine somewhere safe, suggesting she needed immediate legal representation. Within an hour, news vans appeared at the gates. Somehow, though Elias knew exactly how, the media had been tipped off. A billionaire accused of abuse by his beautiful wife. The story wrote itself. Elias said almost nothing. When the police asked for his statement, he simply replied, "I deny all accusations. I have never harmed my wife in any way. I will cooperate fully with any investigation." His calmness seemed to confirm Celine's narrative for some observers. The cold, controlling husband unable to show emotion even when accused. The officers asked him to stay available for further questioning. They didn't arrest him, but the implication was clear. This was serious. This was going to escalate. By evening, every news outlet from Brussels to Berlin was running the story. Billionaire Elias Koenig accused of psychological abuse by wife Celine van Dijk. The headlines varied, but the theme remained consistent. Photographs of Celine looking radiant at charity events were contrasted with newer images of her looking strained, uncomfortable. Body language experts were brought on television to analyze their public appearances. Opinion pieces appeared within hours questioning whether the ultra-wealthy were capable of genuine love or only control. Elias watched it unfold from his study, Naya standing quietly beside him. His phone buzzed constantly. Board members, business partners, friends asking if the accusations were true, if he needed legal help, if they should distance themselves publicly until things cleared up. His empire, built over decades of careful work, was suddenly vulnerable. Stock prices dipped. Investors grew nervous. Contracts were quietly put on hold. Celine and Victor's plan was working exactly as they designed it. They think they've already won, Naya said softly, watching the news coverage on Elias's laptop. They have, Elias replied, his voice hollow. Look at this. My reputation is destroyed. Even if I'm cleared eventually, people will always wonder. They'll always question. Celine was right about one thing. She's a brilliant actress. Naya turned to him, her expression fierce. They haven't won, sir. They've just revealed their hand completely. Every word Celine said to the police is on record now. Every claim can be checked. And tomorrow, when you hold that press conference in Germany, they're going to realize they made a terrible mistake. Elias had wanted to hide, to let his lawyers handle everything quietly. But Naya had convinced him otherwise. Silence might be strategic, but at a certain point, truth needed a voice. The press conference was scheduled for the next afternoon in Munich, close to where Elias had grown up, in a venue that seated 200 journalists. His lawyers had advised against it. Victor and Celine were probably celebrating, assuming Elias would dig himself deeper by appearing emotional or defensive in front of cameras. They had no idea what was coming. That night, Elias couldn't sleep. He stood in his father's old study, looking at a photograph of his mother. She'd died 5 years ago, just before his wealth had truly exploded. She'd never seen the mansion, never met Celine, never witnessed this betrayal. Part of him was grateful for that, but another part desperately wished she were here to tell him what to do. Her voice came anyway, a memory from childhood. Elias, the truth doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. It just needs to be undeniable. In the morning, Elias Koenig flew to Munich. And by that evening, all of Europe would know exactly what undeniable looked like. The press conference room in Munich was silent in the way that only a room full of journalists waiting for blood could be silent. 200 reporters from across Europe sat with cameras ready, notebooks open, expressions ranging from skepticism to barely concealed anticipation. They'd come expecting a billionaire's meltdown, a defensive rich man scrambling to save his reputation with empty denials and expensive lawyers. The story had already been written in their minds. Elias Koenig, the cold industrialist who'd trapped his beautiful wife in a gilded cage, was about to make it worse. Elias walked onto the small stage alone. No team of attorneys flanking him. No publicist whispering strategy. Just a man in a simple dark suit, carrying a leather folder, moving with the deliberate calm that had characterized his entire life. He stood behind the podium, adjusted the microphone, and looked out at the sea of faces. Somewhere in Belgium, he knew Celine and Victor were watching this live, probably with champagne, confident that whatever Elias said would only deepen his grave. Good afternoon, Elias began, his voice steady. My name is Elias Koenig. 2 days ago, my wife Celine accused me of psychological abuse and emotional control. These accusations have been broadcast across Europe. My businesses have suffered. My reputation has been questioned. Many of you are here because you believe this is the story. A powerful man finally being held accountable. He paused, letting that sink in. You're right that someone needs to be held accountable. But you have the wrong person. The room shifted slightly, a rustle of interest. Elias opened the folder and removed a small device, holding it up so the cameras could see. This is a recording made in my home 2 weeks ago. I'm going to play it now. I ask that you listen carefully. All of it. He pressed play. For the next 10 minutes, the voices of Celine van Dijk and Victor Hale filled the conference room. Their casual discussion of fraud. Their laughter about Elias's trust. Their detailed planning of false accusations designed to destroy him financially and publicly. The journalists sat frozen, pens hovering over notebooks, faces registering shock, and then something harder, realization. Several attendees began typing furiously. Others simply listened, the weight of what they were hearing settling like lead. When the recording ended, the silence was absolute. Elias let it stretch, let the truth breathe and expand until it filled every corner of the room. Then he spoke again. My wife never loved me. She married me as part of a calculated plan to extract wealth through false accusations and manipulated legal proceedings. Her partner, Victor Hale, has been orchestrating this from Ireland. Together, they intended to destroy me using the very systems designed to protect abuse victims. They weaponized your sympathy. They manipulated your assumptions about power and gender and wealth. One journalist stood, couldn't help himself. Mr. Koenig, how did you obtain this recording? Why didn't you confront your wife immediately? Elias looked at the man directly. I obtained it because someone in my household had the courage to warn me before I walked into a trap. As for why I didn't confront Celine immediately, because rage is not strategy. Because emotional reactions were exactly what they wanted. They needed me to appear unstable, controlling, dangerous. If I'd stormed into that room furious and heartbroken, I would have played directly into their narrative. Instead, I chose to document everything, to build an undeniable case, to protect not just myself, but any other men they might have targeted before me or would target after me. Another journalist stood, a woman from a Dutch publication. Are you saying your wife's abuse allegations are completely fabricated? That there's no truth to any of her claims? I'm saying that you can verify everything, Elias replied calmly. My security footage shows Victor Hale entering and leaving my home repeatedly while I was traveling. My financial records show no controlling behavior. Celine had access to accounts, credit cards, complete financial freedom. My phone records show no pattern of harassment or monitoring. Staff members, not just one, but several, can testify that my wife was never isolated, never restricted, never afraid. The only thing she feared was being discovered before she could execute her plan. The room erupted with questions, but Elias raised a hand gently. There's more you need to understand. This isn't just about one marriage or one betrayal. My wife and Victor Hale are part of a larger pattern. He nodded toward the side door, and Naya stepped into the room. She was no longer dressed as a maid but wore professional attire, her posture confident, her expression resolute. Several journalists recognized the shift immediately. This wasn't a household employee. This was someone else entirely. Elias gestured for her to join him at the podium. This is Naya Virtanen, Elias said. For the past 6 months, you've known her as my housemaid. But that's not who she really is. Naya took the microphone, her voice clear and unwavering. 3 years ago, my sister Lisa disappeared while working for a European socialite involved in financial fraud. That woman used shell companies in Belgium, Austria, and Denmark to funnel money from wealthy men through marriages and strategic divorces. My sister found evidence and vanished before she could report it. The investigation went nowhere. The woman had protection, connections, resources. The journalists were riveting now, cameras focusing on Naya as she continued. When I discovered that Celine Van Dijk's name appeared in connection with the same shell companies, the same financial patterns, the same intermediary, Victor Hale, I took a position in Mr. Koenig's household, not to spy on him, but to gather evidence. To find out if my sister's disappearance was connected to this network. To stop them before they destroyed another person. Naya pulled out a tablet and displayed documents on the screen behind them, corporate filings, bank transfers, email communications. For months, I documented everything. I sent evidence to authorities in Finland, Sweden, and Germany. What you're seeing now isn't just about Mr. Koenig's marriage. It's about a systematic operation targeting wealthy men across Europe. There are at least 4 other cases we've identified with similar patterns. Men who were accused of abuse, who settled quietly to avoid scandal, whose wealth was extracted through legal manipulation and public pressure. A German journalist stood abruptly. Are you saying all abuse accusations from wealthy marriages are false? That's an incredibly dangerous claim. Naya's expression hardened. I'm saying nothing of the sort. Real abuse happens. Real victims deserve protection and justice. That's exactly why people like Celine Van Dijk and Victor Hale are so destructive. They weaponize real trauma. They exploit legitimate movements. They make it harder for actual victims to be believed. They poison the well. And they do it all while congratulating themselves for being clever. Elias stepped forward again. Since this press conference was announced, my legal team has been contacted by 3 other men across Europe, one in Austria, one in Denmark, one in Sweden. All of them were married to women who knew Celine. All of them were accused of psychological abuse. All of them settled large financial claims to make the accusations go away quietly. None of them had recordings or evidence like I do. They simply paid and disappeared, their reputations permanently damaged, their trust in human connection destroyed. The room had transformed. This was no longer a story about a billionaire trying to dodge accountability. This was something else entirely. A conspiracy, an investigation, a revelation that would ripple across European society for months. The journalists weren't just taking notes anymore. They were witnessing the kind of story that defined careers. A reporter from Ireland stood, his accent thick. Has Victor Hale been arrested? As of 2 hours ago, Elias confirmed, Victor Hale was detained in Dublin on charges of conspiracy to commit fraud and falsifying evidence. Celine van Dijk was taken into custody in Belgium 1 hour ago. Authorities in multiple countries are now coordinating investigations into the financial network they operated. This is no longer a domestic dispute. It's an international criminal case. The questions continued for another 30 minutes, but the narrative had already shifted completely. By that evening, every outlet that had condemned Elias Koenig was scrambling to retract, to reframe, to report the real story. Celine's tearful performance 2 days earlier was now being analyzed not as brave testimony, but as calculated deception. Victor's concerned friend routine was revealed as the act it had always been. The very systems they'd tried to exploit were now turned against them with the full force of evidence and law. Elias didn't feel victorious. He felt exhausted. Vindicated, perhaps, but hollowed out by the realization that the woman he'd married had never seen him as human, just as a target. As he left the press conference, Naya walked beside him, no longer pretending to be invisible. Your sister? Elias asked quietly as they reached the car. Do you think we'll find out what happened to her? Naya's jaw tightened. The authorities in Sweden found records suggesting she was paid to leave the country and stay silent. They're following that trail now. I don't know if she's alive, if she's hiding, or if something worse happened. But at least now we're asking the right questions. Elias nodded slowly. When this is over, truly over, I want to help you find her. Whatever it takes. I know you do, sir, Naya said. And for the first time, she called him by his first name. That's why I trusted you, Elias. Because some people really are good, even when the world gives them every reason not to be. 6 months later, Elias stood at his father's grave in the small cemetery outside Munich where 3 generations of Koenigs rested beneath oak trees. The headstone was simple, weathered by German winters, bearing only a name and dates. His father had been a factory worker, a man who never traveled beyond Bavaria, who died believing his son's wealth was both a blessing and a burden. Elias had carried shame about his origins for years, worried that his success somehow betrayed the humility his parents had taught him. But standing there now, he understood something different. His mother hadn't taught him silence to make him weak. She'd taught him observation, patience, the power of knowing when to speak and when to listen. That wisdom had saved him. Naya had found her sister. Lisa was alive, living under a different name in Canada, too traumatized to return to Europe but willing to testify remotely. The network Celine and Victor had operated was larger than anyone had imagined, spanning 7 countries, targeting 19 men over 8 years, extracting an estimated 40 million euros through coerced settlements and fabricated legal claims. Some of those men would never recover their reputations. Others, emboldened by Elias's public stand, were finally speaking their truth. The trials would take years, but the silence had been broken. Elias didn't rebuild his marriage. There was nothing to rebuild. He focused instead on something his mother would have approved of. He launched a foundation called Be Quiet, Be Wise, funding legal aid for people falsely accused, supporting investigative journalism that exposed fraud, and creating scholarships for young women like Naya, who'd been denied opportunities because of circumstances beyond their control. The foundation's symbol was a small gold pendant shaped like an ear, not representing silence, but listening. paying attention when others looked away. Naya became the foundation's director, bringing the same quiet intensity to helping others that she'd brought to saving him. They never became romantic. Their bond was something different, forged in crisis and built on mutual respect. She told him once that some people were meant to witness each other's worst moments and then help build something better afterward. He thought that was probably the truest definition of family he'd ever heard. As Elias walked away from his father's grave that afternoon, his phone buzzed. A message from Stockholm. Case closed. 3 more arrests.